Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 335 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. The weather's warming up, if only for a week or so, and I'm thinking about the various queen rearing methods that we might use this year. Today, it's the turn of the Nico queen rearing system, and I'll do my very best to explain how it all fits together. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. Before we get into today's beekeeping conversation, and in the absence of anyone else supporting my podcast with an advert or two, here's my little self-promotion again. For all of you who haven't yet signed up to my Patreon page, I, together with Steph, have been creating beekeeping content for many years now, and if you're looking for some straightforward, down-to-earth tips and techniques, help and advice, then do take a look at my Patreon page. We have over 1,600 individual beekeeping posts, videos and podcasts filled with useful and timely help and advice. My approach is pragmatic and calm, sometimes entertaining, but always with help and support for beekeepers at the heart of what I do. I keep my videos short and concise wherever possible, no waffle, no flannel, just honest beekeeping advice from years of keeping bees. Take a look and join me for the new 2025 beekeeping season. It'll cost you less than a jar of honey, and you never know, there may be something there that will help you improve your beekeeping. Head over to Google and search for Patreon and the Norfolk Honey Company. Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. It's bitterly cold here this morning in the beekeeping office. The heater's on in the background. It might kick in, so listen out for that. But looking at the forecast, we may be in for a sudden change and increase in temperature next week. It could get as warm as 14 degrees Celsius here in Norwich, which is a crazy 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I can just see hundreds of beekeepers grabbing for their smokers and hive tools. After all, it's been a long winter without looking into our hives, apart from those of us, sadly, who've been looking through dead hives, wondering what on earth went wrong. But apart from that, most, I suspect, will be desperate to get into their hives and see what's going on. At least, if you're anything like me, you will be. But here we've got to be sensible. Why would we do that? What good are we going to do? In fact, you might ask, why would you do that? Because there's really not that much that you can do. For anyone thinking about opening up their hives during this warm spell, ask yourself why you feel the need to do it, and is it going to do your bees any good? For most, I suspect there's no need, but for some, it might be crucial to the survival of your colony. Let me explain. Some colonies will be in a tricky position right now, weakened by the loss of adult workers over the winter period and stuck maybe with a small patch of brood that they're desperately trying to keep warm. The challenge for them might be accessing food stores, this isolation starvation problem that we sometimes encounter. So it is reasonable for the beekeeper to open up the hive, perhaps after hefting, and just quickly checking on where food stores are in relation to the cluster of bees on that brood. It is also reasonable to manipulate a couple of frames from the outer edge of the brood box and move them closer to that patch of brood where the bees can get to the food more easily. If you do this, I would also very quickly scrape away a few of the cappings on those honey stores so that the bees can very easily get into the food, and that aroma of the honey will permeate into the cluster for all of them to detect. But do no more than this. Do not split open the brood nest area and start looking for eggs and the queen. This is not the time to start inspecting colonies. certainly as we would in the heat of a lovely spring day. This warm spell in mid-February is unusual, I would suggest, and not a signal to start inspections proper. If you know your bees are okay, there are plenty of workers in your hive, hefting gives a positive result in terms of food stores, then leave them well alone and watch them bringing back crocus and snowdrop pollen. All we'll do with these colonies is more harm than good if we open them up and inspect them. But if you feel a need to add fondant to colonies that are maybe low on stores, then do so. But again, I urge caution. I'm looking for my colonies to start making space for that upturn in egg laying and brood production that comes with the longer days and an increase in spring temperatures. If you fill them up with fondant, they'll quickly run out of space and could swarm even before you make that first proper inspection. I know this because it's happened to me, particularly last year when I was poorly. The weather patterns will soon swing back to cold weather again, and we beekeepers will once more have to sit on our hands and be patient. And honestly, that's not a bad thing really. Although the new season is just around the corner, in reality it's still some distance off, and all we'll do is cause more trouble for our bees and more worry for ourselves. Rather than rushing out and inspecting our bees, perhaps we should spend the warmer weather clearing out the shed and sorting through our spare equipment, getting it tidy, clean, and where needed, repaired. I've just been doing exactly that and sorting through our spare honeypore polyhives at the workshop, identifying what needs work and what we can put straight out into the apiaries, because you can guarantee the season will get going rapidly, and if I'm not ready, I'll get caught out. Oh, before I forget, to clarify a point from an earlier podcast, I was talking, I think a couple of weeks ago, about a shook swarm process during the summer to create some nukes from existing hives. The reason for this, and actually something I forgot to mention at the time, fairly important issue, was that the nukes were 14 by 12 size BS honeybee nuke boxes, and the colonies that I was using were in Langstroth hives. Hence the need to convert from one to the other, and the reason for shaking bees into the nuke boxes and not simply moving over the frames. I'm really sorry if I've caused any confusion. Actually, it turned out to be a really good way of creating those nukes regardless, and we have some very strong nukes coming out of the winter, and those original hives are doing very nicely too. Last week, I spoke about some basic queen rearing techniques as a method of swarm control more than anything else, methods that I've used and continue to use to produce new queens from those early swarm cells that will doubtless pop up in our hives again this year. To follow on from that, we can use, I guess you might call them, more advanced techniques, although they really are quite easy and simple to learn and use. Before we get on to that, the obvious technique of splitting a colony is using the artificial swarm and has been well documented, and I've discussed it as a method several times over the years. That said, it's a valuable and valid method for beekeepers to use, regardless of your experience and years of beekeeping. For those beginner beekeepers out there who are totally perplexed by all of this talk, don't worry. We'll record a video or two showing a mocked-up hive setup and walk you through the entire process of an artificial swarm ready for the start of the new season. And once we're up and running, we'll actually carry out an artificial swarm demonstrating the process in detail. If you are new to beekeeping, please don't let the thought of doing this worry you. Once you get the hang of the way the colony works and how splitting them impacts the interaction between the workers, queen and brood, you'll get the hang of it really quickly and wonder why you ever became so stressed about it all. For those of you looking for a little more from your beekeeping season, we're going to dig out the Nico queen rearing system once again and give that another go. This is a really lovely system of producing larger numbers of queens and can be used over and over again throughout the season. If you're looking to build up an active queen rearing system for yourself, or maybe a group of beekeeping buddies, or in fact a group within your beekeeping association, which also might be the group of your beekeeping buddies, this may well be worth a shot. If you're wondering what on earth I'm talking about, the Nico queen rearing system is built around a plastic cassette that houses a trapped queen where she can only lay eggs in the Nico system. The cassette is called a cupulave, I hope I've got that correct, and has enough spaces for the queen to lay 110 eggs in small individual cells called cell cups. This allows the beekeeper to remove the very young larvae without the need to use a grafting tool and the inherent struggles that their use brings. Don't get me wrong, grafting is very simple, but it takes practice, and unless you're grafting hundreds of young larvae, there's a likelihood that you'll damage or kill quite a number of those young larvae as you attempt to graft them from the brood frame into cell cups. So, why risk it when there's a system that can take away that potentially damaging step? I've used both methods, grafting and the Nico system, and had far more success with this Nico system than grafting, exactly because I don't do that grafting often enough to get my eye in. So maybe half of the grafts, at least, didn't take, and it's then wasted time and space within your queen rearing setup. Apart from the cupulave cassette, the Nico system consists really of a bag full of bits that again look quite complicated when you first split open the bag. The best thing to do is to lay the individual components out on a table and look closely at how they fit together prior to trying out the system, and it suddenly becomes a whole lot simpler. Let me talk you through the system, and hopefully it might encourage you to give it a go. One word of caution though, make sure you buy the genuine Nico cassette system. There are lots of copycat systems out there, and they're not always the right size, so do make sure that you buy the genuine goods. To start with, we have a dark brown support that's fixed to the underside of a top bar of a brood frame. They're what I would call self-spacing, so they can be placed side by side and nailed fixed to the top bar. It is possible to get another row beneath the top bar, but you need to be mindful of how far down the queen cells will be drawn, and then whether or not you use some of the other kit called an incubator cage or a hatching cage. The hatching cage in particular is the thing that will catch you out. I'll explain about this in a moment. Let's just start with a single row of supports along a brood frame top bar to start with, and expansion can follow. Thinking about the cupulave cassette once more, into the rear of the cassette we fix the tiny cell cups, which Nico give a designation of CNE3 in their catalogue. These are tiny little cups that the queen is hopefully going to lay eggs into. When we have very young larvae in them, they're taken out and placed into a cell cup block, catalogue code CNE2. This simply pushes onto that support that's fixed into the brood frame, and that's called a CNE1. So we have the support fixed to the brood frame. Pushed into that we have the cell cup block, and into that we have the actual cell cup with our very young larvae in it. Now once all of the supports have a cell cup block and cell cup pushed into them, the frame can go into your cell builder colony. At this point I would urge you to not panic and worry about cell builders and cell finishers and all the other terminology that queen rearing brings to the party. We'll talk about those in a later podcast. Let's for now put our Nico frame of cell cups with very young larvae in them into a hopelessly queenless colony and let them simply produce queen cells. For the beginners out there, this is a colony that has no available eggs or very young larvae from which they can produce a viable queen cell, so they're forced to use the young larvae that we give them. Clever, huh? Now, I'm going to skip forward a bit here. There's lots to talk about in between, but I don't want to confuse the situation and go off on one of my now famous diversions. Once the queen cells have been drawn out and capped, you have several options. Option number 1 is remove the cell cup block and cell cup carefully with the sealed queen cell and place this into a queen mating nuke or queenless nuke or queenless colony and allow that queen to emerge naturally. Option 2, you could remove the entire frame and place the hatching cages over each of those sealed queen cells. These are CNE5 in the catalogue, and they have an attached seal, a cap, that encloses the queen cell, and that lid, the cap, has a small recess in it that a little honey could be placed in. I don't usually find this necessary, as the workers will feed the virgin queens through the holes in the side of these cages. You might hear them referred to as hair roller cages. What these do for the beekeepers is allow the queens to emerge, but retains them within their individual cage, so that the first queen out doesn't either kill all of the others or swarm with the cell builder colony. I've made that mistake in both examples, so believe me when I say they're really important to use if you might be delayed in getting into your hive because of bad weather or other unavoidable issue. The other alternative that I'd like to touch on for those of you getting into queen rearing in a big way is to use an incubator to store those queen cells, and in this instance you can use the custom-made CNE4 special incubator cage. These are basically the same as the hatching cage, but have a solid base and an open top, and you place the queen cell complete with cell cup and cell cup holder into the top of that cage. Are you still with me? Honestly, it's not so complicated once you see it and handle it. I have an older video available on, I think, YouTube, certainly on Patreon, where I show each component part, but it's probably best for me to update that video now and show you the system working in the apiary in a practical demonstration. Look out for that once the weather warms up into the spring. Finally on this topic, and to add a word of caution, it's not foolproof, as I've already explained. I find possibly the biggest challenge though, and it's one that I've had reported back to me on a regular basis, is the reluctance of the queen to lay eggs in the cell cups once she's placed into that cupulave cassette. And I've had this happen to us too, so it does happen. The bigger challenge I find when this happens is the constant trips backwards and forwards to the apiary and back to check in on her to see if she has actually started to lay. One solution we've found to this, to get the queen into that cassette, is to place the cassette into the hive early and perhaps give it a spray with some sugar syrup or diluted honey. Spray that into the cell cups all over the cassette, and it encourages the workers to get in there and clean that brand new plastic material out and maybe transfer some of the hive chemistry in and around it. As with all of these techniques, seeing it in action really helps, so we'll get cracking with a demonstration just as soon as we can. Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget to check out my website www.norfolk-honey.co.uk, and for my latest videos and podcasts with more updates, tips and techniques, it's the same Patreon page www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey. And remember, I'm Stewart Spinks, and that was Beekeeping Short and Sweet.